Day had barely broken when the man turned off the main Yukon Trail, stepping onto a narrow path that wound through the endless white landscape. The cold was severe 75 degrees below zero, but he barely acknowledged it. The sky, though cloudless, held no warmth. A dim, pale sun sat low on the horizon, giving light but no heat. The air was utterly still, and the vast frozen wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions. No birds, no moving, just silence. A large wolfish dog followed behind him. Its thick fur was bristling, its breath visible in the icy air. Unlike the man, the dog understood the cold. It felt the creeping touch of death in the air, but it obeyed, following its master. He was heading to Henderson Creek, where his companions waited at camp. He had planned his journey well be 6 o'clock. He would be sitting by a warm fire, drinking hot coffee and resting his tired feet. Despite the extreme temperature, he felt calm, in control. He was a practical man, a man of thought rather than emotion. The cold was merely an obstacle to overcome, nothing more. As he moved along the trail, the snow beneath his boots crunched sharply, dry and powdery in the bitter cold. His breath formed clouds of frost that hung motionless before drifting away. He noticed that his spittle froze midair, breaking into tiny ice crystals before it hit the ground. He laughed at the oddity of it. The cold was nothing to fear, just a number on a thermometer. He walked carefully, mindful of hidden dangers beneath the snow. Beneath the surface lay springs of running water, treacherously concealed by thin layers of ice. To fall through meant disaster. To be safe, he sent the dog ahead. "Go on," he commanded, nodding toward the trail. The dog hesitated, ears pricked forward. It could sense the danger, but it obeyed. It stepped forward, and the ice gave way beneath it. A sharp yelp cut through the silent air as the dog plunged chest deep into icy water. It scrambled out quickly, shaking violently, its thick fur already beginning to freeze. Without hesitation, it gnawed at the ice on its paws, licking them frantically to keep them from turning to stone. The man chuckled at its reaction. "Smart animal," he muttered. But he did not fully grasp the lesson the dog had just demonstrated. An hour later, feeling sure of his path, the man walked with renewed confidence. He had avoided several hidden springs and felt satisfied with his progress. Then, without warning, the ground beneath him gave way. For a split second, he felt nothing but empty air beneath his feet. Then, with a loud crack, he crashed through the thin ice, plunging knee-deep into the freezing water. A violent shock of cold shot through his body. The pain was immediate, stabbing. His feet, his ankles, his shin soles soaked. He scrambled out as quickly as he had fallen in, but the damage was done. Already, the moisture was turning to ice against his skin, sealing his flesh in a deadly grip. If he didn't act fast, he would lose his feet. His thoughts raced. He had to build a fire, immediately. His hands trembled as he tore off his moccasins, exposing his bare, white flesh to the air. Already his toes felt like chunks of dead wood. He moved with urgency, gathering dry twigs and bark from beneath a pine tree, breaking them into a neat pile. His fingers were already growing stiff, but he still had control. Striking a match, he shielded the flame with his body, carefully feeding it tiny slivers of wood. The fire grew, flickering to life, and relief flooded him. But as he reached for a thicker branch, he made a terrible mistake. A small fire had melted the frost on the branches above. A shift, a whisper of movement, then a heavy load of snow tumbled down. The fire was gone. A blanket of snow smothered it in an instant. For a moment, the man simply stared, uncomprehending. The small pile of burning life extinguished before his eyes, leaving only smoking embers. A wave of sheer panic washed over him. His mind screamed, "I must build another fire now!" His fingers were numb, stiff, clumsy. Each movement felt slow, disconnected from his body. He reached into his pocket for a match, but it slipped from his useless fingers, falling into the snow. Another, then another. With a surge of desperation, he grabbed the whole pack of matches in his teeth. His lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold, but he bit down hard, struck them all at once. For a brief moment, a bright flame burst to life, a tiny sun in the frozen wasteland. But his hands, shaking and slow, failed him. He tried to move the fire to the twigs, the wind snatched it away. The last light died, leaving him in the vast, uncaring cold. His final hope was gone. His eyes flicked to the dog. A terrible thought took shape in his mind. If he could kill the animal, he could bury his hands in its warm body, thawing them enough to light another fire. He lunged clumsily at the dog, but his grip was weak, his frozen fingers useless. The dog sensed danger and sprang away, snarling. Its primal instincts warned it that the man was no longer its master, but a desperate, dying creature. For the first time, a cold, paralyzing fear gripped the man's chest. Panic took hold. He turned and ran, stumbling through the snow. His movements were wild, uncoordinated, his breath coming in painful, shallow gasps. His feet were blocks of ice, his legs wooden, moving on pure instinct. He had to get to camp. He could see it in his Minda-warm fire, his friends waiting, hot coffee steaming in the cold air. But reality was crueler. He tripped, fell. The snow embraced him, soft and smothering. He tried to rise. Nothing. His limbs no longer obeyed. His mind screamed, but his body whispered, "Sleep." Lying in the snow, the fear left him. The pain faded. His mind drifted into a strange, comforting warmth, like sinking into a soft bed. Visions flickered before his Aisha's cabin, the fire crackling, the voices of his friends laughing. He smiled. Slowly, his eyes fluttered closed. The cold had won. The dog sat watching him. Its ears twitched. The man did not move. The dog sniffed the air. The scent of death was there. It whined, circled him once, then turned toward the distant camp. There would be fire there, and fire was life.